Okay, so hi, my name is Yaren Tsfoni, and today I'll be discussing my research on the Paleoethnobotanical analysis of Hellenistic Tel Shimron. So before we begin, I think it's important that we define a few key terms that I'll be using throughout the presentation. So first, what even is paleoethnobotany? So it's the study of relationships between people and plants in the past through the identification and analysis of ancient plant remains. And then the next term that we'll be discussing is the time period that we'll be talking about, and that's the Hellenistic age, which is really hard to kind of condense into one small definition, but essentially it lasted between 323 BCE through 30 BCE, and it started with the death of Alexander the Great, who expanded the Greek world from Persia all the way to Macedonian Greece, south to Egypt, and upon his death, the empire was split into four parts. Four separate polities, and important to this discussion is the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire, which are the green and the orange on the map. And so these overlapping areas of control between the four new independent polities allowed for a highly connected system of trade and interconnected economic and cultural trade networks. And Tel Shimron, the site that we'll be discussing, was under Ptolemaic rule between 300 BCE to 198 BCE, and then under Seleucid rule from 198 BCE on. And then lastly, what is the Levant? So the Levant is a geographical region that refers to the Eastern Mediterranean and Western Asia, and we'll be focusing on sites located in modern day Israel. So this discussion will be focusing on a paleoethnobotanical assemblage. So just think really big bags of soil with lots of little ancient seeds in them from the site of Tel Shimron, which is the red dot on the map. And then I'll be comparing the results to other Hellenistic sites in the Levant, such as Tel Kedish, Tel Estaba, Tel Uhesi, and Ashkelon. And then this in turn will provide a preliminary report and discussion that will provide a better, broader understanding of trends, themes in regard to Hellenistic agricultural practices and processes and preferences in the Levant. But why do we care? Much is known about the art, culture, politics, and architecture of the Hellenistic age, but little is known about the agricultural economy of this period, which we know is the backbone of economic prosperity and driver of widespread trade in this region. Therefore, understanding the specific details of the agriculture itself will help us better understand the similarities and differences across Levantine sites, which is especially important in order to reach the ultimate goal of understanding the daily lives of those who once lived here, worked here, and experienced this reality. So what do we already know about Hellenistic agriculture? Looking at data from other sites, it suggests that the staple agricultural crops that were grown during the Hellenistic age were olives, grapes, free threshing wheats, barley, lentils, and bitter vetch. In the Jezreel Valley, where Tel Shimron is, weather conditions allow for the widespread growth of wheat and barley, with wheat being the preferred cereal. Oak woodlands were also replaced with grape vineyards and olive cultivation during this period. Therefore, it's expected that Tel Shimron should have similar results, but research reveals that Tel Shimron is a bit unique compared to other Hellenistic sites. So a little bit more about the region and the site itself. So Tel Shimron is located in a geographical region known as the Jezreel Valley, which is located in northern Israel. And you can see it outlined in the orange, and the red dot is Tel Shimron. So it's marked by fertile plains, which allow for highland dry farming and irrigated crops, which in turn has supported long periods of human settlement. Tel Shimron itself was occupied for nearly 5,000 years from the early Bronze Age up through the Mamluk period. And then today we will be specifically discussing a part of the site known as Grid 9490 and Grid 9491, and I have the map of the site up there. And this is the context in which all the soil samples were collected. Excavations are ongoing, but 5 phases of occupation have been identified, and we'll be looking at 2 Hellenistic phases, phase 3 and phase 4. A mud brick building was identified from phase 4 and is seen on the site map on the slide. Since excavations are still in their early stages, little is known about the actual uses of the rooms. They think that room F may have been an industrial courtyard, and area H may be another courtyard or part of a terracing system. Our hearth, which is kind of like an ancient oven, 2 samples were collected from there, and that's located in area H. So the methods used for all of this work. So in the field, 55 soil samples were collected by archaeologists from grid 9490 through 91 and were processed using a flow-tech machine like the one on the slide. From there, soil samples were sent to the BU Environmental Archaeology Lab, where I was able to begin my research. So I started off by ranking the samples by priority, and then 16 samples in total were sorted, quantified, and identified using the BU EAL lab protocol. From here, I use a series of analytical methods, such as raw data, which will allow for unmanipulated data to be used by future researchers. And for standardization and comparison purposes, ubiquities, ratios, and proportions were calculated in order to provide standardized, specific, and clear ways of interpreting the data. So once all the math was out of the way, I could begin interpreting the data. And the following few slides will go into detail about what I found. So as an overview, domesticated crops fall under 3 categories: cereals, pulses, and fruit/other. And as a reminder, it is expected that free threshing wheats, barley, lentils, grapes, olives, and bitter vetch will be the primary crops here. However, what was unexpected was the high presence of emmer chaff, the presence of both flaxseed and fenugreek, and the very weirdly low presence of olive and grape. Each of these will be discussed in more detail shortly. And now I'll go through the major crop categories. So first I'll be talking about cereals. The 3 main cereal crops identified at Tel Shimron are barley and free threshing wheat, which are expected, and emmer. Emmer was not really grown at other sites, so it's kind of interesting that it shows up here. And other sites also highly relied on cereals, but evidence from Tel Shimron shows that cereal was not as abundant as other sites. However, like other sites except Eshkelon, free threshing wheat is the primary cereal crop. Emmer does not appear in significant quantities, except at Tel Staba, so it's showing that there's, along with the 2 dominating barley and wheat, we have emmer. And next I'll be talking about the pulses. So the 2 main pulses identified are lentil and bitter vetch. Lentil was not an uncommon staple in the Levant due to its high protein levels and is found at other sites such as Tel Hesi, Eshkelon, Tel Staba, and Tel Kedish, but appears at Tel Shimron in much, much smaller quantities. Bitter vetch is found in 1/4 of all samples and may be an indication of dung fuel, which is a line of evidence that sadly I won't have time to discuss in this presentation. And then the last category is the fruit/other category. And so many fruits common to Levant were found: grapes, olive, figs, and dates. And the reason you can't really see on the graphs itself that Tel Shimron even has any of those, because the seeds were so fragmented and small, we couldn't even count them, but they're there. The low presence of olive and grape, however, especially in comparison to Eshkelon and Tel Kedish, is interesting, as I explained before, this region saw the replacement of oak woodlands with olive groves and the cultivation of grapevines during the Hellenistic period, which perhaps reveals that grape and olive were not important economic crops here. So now I'll go into specific discussions. Free threshing wheat and emmer chaff. So free threshing wheats appear in over 50% of the samples with a count of at least 15, while emmer only appears in 25% of the samples with a count of 2. Upon looking at the plant parts, so it's specifically looking at the chaff, which is the dry, scaly protective casing of the cereal grains themselves. So upon looking at those plant parts, free threshing wheats appear in lower quantities and ubiquities than those belonging to emmer. So this provides a lot of insight into processing and storage in this region. So free threshing wheat is often processed off-site through a process of threshing, raking, and winnowing, which means they are stored as naked grains with perhaps only a few plant parts remaining by accident. On the other hand, emmer would have been stored intact without the removal of chaff, and emmer chaff is more durable than that of wheat, able to withstand close to 150 degrees Celsius before any structural changes occur. So what is happening? Perhaps the free threshing wheats are cleaned before entering the context of 94, 90 through 91 and stored as clean grains intended for consumption, while emmer was stored intact with its chaff and processed again to remove the chaff shortly before cooking, therefore depositing the chaff into the hearth. So this is a perfect way of understanding cooking practices at Tel Shimron and may suggest that emmer was an important cereal to this region, marking it as unique from other sites. The next interesting crop is flaxseed. So flax is an herbaceous plant that both in antiquity and today is grown for oil production and textile production like linen. Flax was not uncommon in the Levant, and evidence shows cultivation dates back as far as the Neolithic period, and during the Greco-Roman period, which we're looking at, it was mainly grown for the production of linen, with some evidence suggesting it may have been stored as a famine food or part of a regular dietary supplement. From the context of U9490 through 91, flax has a ubiquity of 25%, and a majority were found in one of the hearth samples. Production of flaxseed oil, as seen in traditional Anatolian practices, requires roasting the seeds first before grinding them up. Therefore, the hearth may have been used as part of the oil extraction process. Also, weed seeds that often appear alongside flax were not found. So had this flax been sorted and cleaned on site, it would be expected to find higher counts of these weed seeds. Therefore, it's unlikely that U90 through 91 was used for cleaning and sorting of cultivated flax. Rather, it's probably brought to this area as a pure crop seed, roasted for the extraction of oil and consumption. And if we want evidence for linen, we'd have to find evidence of linen production itself, so spindle whorls and loom weights and looms themselves. We didn't find them those yet. And next we'll be talking about fenugreek, which does not appear at any other site in the Levant, except there was one site from the late Bronze Age, which is a few hundred years before this site, at the site of Tel Bet Shemesh. And what they concluded there was that the fenugreek was in a storage room and was part of some kind of royal exchange with Egypt. But the fenugreek at Tel Shimron was found in the hearth, which is the same context where the flaxseed was found. And looking into this, contemporary uses of flaxseed oil and fenugreek in food preparation and medicinal uses is still common today in the Middle East. Therefore, the higher quantity of fenugreek, but lower quantities of olive and grape in comparison to other sites provides an interesting contrast, which may suggest a unique use of 9490 through 91 in the Hellenistic age, and starts raising questions of, was this area used for medicinal purposes? So what does it all mean? The Hellenistic assemblage from Tel Shimron presented interesting results, especially in comparison to other Hellenistic Levantine sites. So the staple crops found at other sites were also found here, but so do emmer and emmer chaff, flax, and fenugreek. They also appear. So this raises a lot of questions about differing agricultural preferences and practices of the Levant in the Hellenistic age. But because excavations are so new, we cannot come to any definite conclusions about the daily going-ons at Tel Shimron or much about the agriculture itself. But what I did find, and the research I did, will provide a really strong foundation for future research that will be able to do so. And with just the little evidence we have, Tel Shimron is already presenting unique results from other sites, and can show that just because like there's one region where everybody, or like one part of the world where everybody's living under one time period, there can be differences in what was important economically and how people live their daily lives. So it's going to be exciting to see where the research goes in the future. Thank you very much.